All right, so if you noticed on today's Canvas page, we do talk about characterization. We're going to use Tom as our kind of guide to show us how Fitzgerald functions as writer to characterize. He does it in a little bit of a different way. And if you look at the words he uses to describe Tom, you will notice that they are atypical. He's using words that are associated with Tom's personality to describe the physical objects of Tom. For example, if we look at how he describes his eyes, he describes his eyes as arrogant. If I plucked your eyeballs out of your skull, put them on the table, could your eyes themselves be arrogant? No. Instead, it is the way you come across as a person, the way you carry yourself, the things you say, the way you arch your eyebrows and eyelids that give off that air of arrogance. And so you notice here, he's using this simple method of giving you a characteristic, a personality trait, to help to emphasize how Tom is. We follow that up by describing his mouth here as hard. You touch your own mouth. Your teeth are hard, but your mouth is full of nothing but soft tissue. To describe Tom as hard describes the words that come out of his mouth, the aggressive manner that he says them. After reading chapter 1, these two qualities about Tom should be apparent, but we also see it immediately put together here at the very end. We look at the first thing that Tom says. First words out of his mouth are, "I've got a nice place here." If someone comes to visit your house, who says this line? The owner of the house or the visitor? The owner? Normally, we don't brag about where we live. Normally, it's the person that's visiting that compliments the house. To brag about it in this way reinforces Tom's arrogance. If we look at the rest of the chapter, we think about how Tom comes across as hard. Think about the conversation about the book. Think about the way that he curses and carries himself. And that's only going to be more emphasized as we get to tomorrow in chapter 2. We have a third quality that comes across strongly to show this connection between a physical description but using a personality trait, and it's right here. We know that Tom is powerful. We know that he's known in his college days as a football player. But to describe his body as cruel, again, the body itself cannot be cruel in and of itself. It can do cruel things with intent. And so when we look at Tom as having this cruel body, we're going to pay that off. We do emphasize his physical nature that we have here, the power of it, again, here at the bottom of the page. Notice that as he wants Nick to look at things, Nick says that he is being turned, as though Tom physically is moving him like, look here, now look here, now let's go inside. He definitely gets in the way to do that, to assert himself. But in all three of these instances, we notice that Fitzgerald is using a personality characteristic to stand in place. He's not just giving us a description of the person, he's also giving us a description of their personality. And so as we look at how we can transition to writing about this, we want to emphasize that Fitzgerald describes a character a certain way and pays that description off through their characterizing features. Well, if you look at today's Canvas page, you notice that I've given you some samples. So how can we make this work in a short response? Well, we know that when we write about literature and we're answering a question, we pull quotations from the passage to help to show our answer and our stance. We know that we have to add commentary to explain our point. We can't just say, hey, Tom is described in this way. Have to explain like we did. If we see Tom as arrogant, if his eyes are described as arrogant, why does that matter? So I gave you 3 examples. One is weak, One is good and then one is better. Now, in putting these together, I tried to model what I see students do when they write, because I don't want to give you like, hey, look, I wrote this one myself, and all you have is the bright, shining example. That doesn't really help to show you how to get there. When we ask students, hey, how is Tom characterized? A lot of times they'll come across with this. When Nick goes to dinner, he sees that Tom has changed. Does that answer the question? No, I mean, he comments on Tom and how he looks, but we don't have anything to describe Tom in that first sentence. Student gives me a long quote, the entire sentence. Now he was a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30 with a rather hard mouth and a supercilious manner. Okay. In college, Tom must have had bad hair and been a mean person. What? What? Bad hair? Just because he has straw hair now? Had bad hair in college? Do you notice how the quote doesn't actually make sense with what they're trying to describe? Not at all. Then it says, Nick talks about how Tom is powerful and strong. Tom has a cruel body and had enormous power. Okay, are they right here? They're giving me descriptions of Tom. They're telling me how he is. But does this show anything about how Tom has changed? So you notice with this one, there's a couple of problems. Logic is a big one. The student isn't clear about how Tom is described. Versus here, when we get to the good response, you're going to notice they're going to focus on a character trait. They're going to use an adjective. How is Tom described? They're going to pull evidence from the passage that actually supports their view and explain how these things work together. Tom is described as arrogant. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face. This helps to show that Tom is arrogant. Now, I saw your look. Why the look?
Yes, very simple.
Exactly. There is that repetition. But is it better than this? It's focused. Now, again, what I wanted to do is I wanted to pull what students do. I didn't want to give you right off, hey, look, here's what I would do. We want to show that progression. At least here, yeah, it's repetitive. Absolutely. But we understand that the student's able to go, personality trait, the quote shows it, I can say it. Tom is also described as saying, I'm stronger and more of a man than you. Tom says that he's better than Nick, which means that Tom has become arrogant. Now it's repetitive, but does the logic make sense here? Notice the second thing here that makes this a little bit better. Students sometimes don't know what they want to write when they start. They have an idea, but they don't quite understand it. And a common thing that I see in student writing is that it gets better as it goes. The first example may be really basic. But the second example, the student figures out how to word it a little bit better. And we see that here. He also points out, I've got a nice place here. And that the house belonged to Domain the oil man. Tom is trying to show off and be arrogant to Nick. Now, did we have to have this be arrogant part here? Probably not. We probably could have said he's trying to show off and support it. But the student wants to make sure, hey, I'm focused on arrogance. They want to make sure they're answering the question. So it's better. It's at least there, but we can see, hey, there are places I can improve this, and that's okay. We want to be able to see those moments where we go, that's rough. Good. If you recognize that it's rough, it's going to help you to go, how do I approach this in a better way? Now let's look at the last example here, the one that's a little bit better. This up. The emphasis on Tom's physicality and the descriptions used to physically describe him help to embody a gruff, arrogant individual. Does this one better show the way that we talked about how Fitzgerald actually characterizes? that it's the connection between the personality description and the physical description, this is good. This is better. Fitzgerald's word choice in describing Tom, such as describing his hard mouth, arrogant eyes, and cruel body, act to describe his personality traits through his physical description. Notice here, full sentence, just the words they needed. When we talk about using evidence effectively, we see that this student knows exactly what they need to make their point. This student feels like they have to give me the whole quote. When we look at this one too, notice how the student uses the evidence, but is still the driver of the main idea in the sentence. Their logic is dictating and controlling the answer. Whereas here, they give me the full quote and they almost hand over control to the writer before they try to take it back to explain. Here, this is seamless. This student is in control. He says, we see this personality further developed through Nick's imagined comment from Tom, that he seems to be saying that he is stronger and more of a man than whomever he's speaking with. His gruff, husky tenor, or his speaking voice, a gruff, husky tenor, helps us to imagine the tone with which his words are spoken. Notice that we're involving this in multiple ways. Does this sound repetitive like this one? We're more fully investigating what it is Fitzgerald does to characterize. Now, am I looking at you and going, hey, this is what we're going to produce today? Likely we're going to be somewhere between these two. We get that this is repetitive, so you're going, you know what? I can write a better response than that. But you're probably looking here and going, oof, I don't know that I'm there yet. Some of you might be. And I want you to see, hey, this is how this could look. How can we make sure that we get there? Well, I've given you some things to help. If you look at the third document on today's Canvas page, sometimes what makes that student in the good response sound repetitive is they just don't know how to frame their thinking. We said that good response gets better as it goes because they kind of figure it out. If you find that you're in that place, I'll build you a little cheat sheet. We want to remember the 3 steps to good writing like this. We want to answer the question clearly in the first sentence. We want to prove that answer with quotations. And then we want to explain your thinking through your commentary. So what I've done is give you some sentence stems in case you've never used sentence stems like this. You don't write each sentence on its own line. No. You also don't fill in each blank here and give me like, oh, look, for the next step, I have 4 sentences. No. You use these to help build the paragraph that you're going to write. So if you're like, I like this one, you would carry that over, start it as the first sentence, and then follow up, if you need one of these, with this is your second sentence. You wouldn't go, here's line 1, here's line 2. No. We use them as tools to ultimately build that paragraph. Now, if you're looking at this, is this a requirement? Absolutely not. Some of you do not need a tool like this to be able to write. I have seen you do it well without this. But if you're somebody that just struggles with, hey, I just want to make it look decent, I can give you the quotations, I can explain myself, I just want to make sure that I have it looking nice. Hey, you got this to help. Your goal today should be a 5-sentence response. That gives you the opportunity to answer the question in sentence 1, give me a quote and explain it. So that would be 2, 3. Give me a second quote in your 4th sentence and explain it with a 5th. We don't need to overthink this. We ultimately want to do some basic things. In the first sentence, describe Tom with an adjective. Is he arrogant? Is he domineering? Is he strong? Is he cruel? As we pull the quotes, we want to show what's there. And a good writer is going to be able to go, hey, here's how he's described with my first quote. And here's what he actually does with the second quote that proves it. So think about if you were going to describe him as arrogant, his eyes show it, his mouth proves it. And so look at how you can build that logic in. By the time you leave, we want to submit this response into Canvas. If you have